It's this part, in The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey. In an attempt to explain where the spiders were coming from that were now inhabiting Mirkwood and causing so much chaos and destruction, Radagast provided an explanation of where they came from. That explanation being that they were actually spawned from Ungoliant. And another thing to think about when considering the films is when Frodo is there in Shelob's lair, battling that ginormous spider. For those of you who don't know, that spider, Shelob, is a spawn of Ungoliant. So who was Ungoliant? To consider that, we do have to take a step back and to make sure we have a foundational understanding of some other things. The god of the Tolkien universe is Eru-Ilúvatar. And Eru-Ilúvatar created the world which Middle-earth sits in, that world being Arda. And before that world was created, Eru-Ilúvatar created powerful spiritual angelic beings. These powerful spiritual angelic beings were known as the Ainur. And there were two different kinds of Ainur, the Valar or Vala, or Maiar or Maya. Valar being plural, and Maiar being plural. The Valar were more powerful, and the Maiar were less powerful and served the Valar. These Ainur were created from Eru-Ilúvatar's thoughts, and they also assisted in the creation of the world that is Arda. And the world of Arda was initially designed through music, and the Ainur assisted in designing the world through their own music. And as the music of Eru-Ilúvatar and the music of the Ainur began to be in harmony, the world of Arda was being designed. However, during this time, there was one of the Valar, Melkor, who began to insert discord within the music. And this discord came as a result of his own selfish desires and thoughts. However, despite his attempts, he did not frustrate the plans of Eru-Ilúvatar, and the world was eventually designed and then created by Eru-Ilúvatar with the assistance of the Ainur. That being said, Melkor continued to oppose the attempts of the other Valar in trying to shape and beautify the world that was Arda. Initially, the light that was provided to the world of Arda came from two lamps. These lamps were named Elluin and Ormiel. Elluin had a blue light, and Ormiel had a golden light. In opposition to the rest of the Valar, Melkor destroyed these two lamps and brought darkness into the world of Arda. But once those lamps were destroyed, they fled to another body of land, kind of like a continent, known as Aman. And there in Aman, they went to a specific part and founded Valinor, which would be kind of like a country. And that became the home of the Valar and the Maiar. Once in Valinor, a Valar named Yavanna created these two trees that would eventually provide light to the land of Valinor. Yavanna was able to do this through song. And then a Valar named Nianna was able to assist in the creation of these trees by watering them with her tears. These two trees were named Telperion and Laurelin. Telperion's light was silver like the moon, and Laurelin provided a golden light like the sun. This brings us to Ungoliant. As far as what exactly is Ungoliant, we don't really know. From my understanding, and from reading what Tolkien's son said about what Tolkien's intent was with the origin of Ungoliant, we're not really supposed to know. It's supposed to be a mystery. And part of that mystery is some supposing that Ungoliant was a Maiar, that lesser angelic spiritual entity that had been corrupted by Melkor, because Melkor did corrupt many Maiar and other creations of Eru-Ilúvatar. However, there's no record of her creation amongst the Ainur, so that answer provides some confusion as to how she could possibly be a Maiar if she's not listed amongst those created of the Ainur in the beginning. But my understanding is some of the Eldar, those earliest of elves that lived in Valinor, believed that she was a fallen Maiar. However, some of the writings suggest that the Valar believed that she was something else entirely, some sort of spiritual being that was present outside of the realms of Arda, just living in this darkness outside of Arda until she decided to make herself present. In short, Ungoliant eventually settled in the land of Avathar, and there she took on the form of a monstrous spider. So her initial form wasn't that of a spider, and even when she does take on the form of a spider, we're still not quite exactly sure how that looks. However, we do know that wherever she was, she tried to suck up light, and there she would spin webs and turn light into gloom. Eventually, she consumed all the light in that area. During that time, the fallen Valar, Melkor, who would also be known as Morgoth, the first Dark Lord, came to Ungoliant. And there they made a plan to destroy the two trees of Valinor that provided light to those lands. So Melkor would again attempt to destroy the light of the world, and the light that the Ainur lived by. And during this time, Melkor promised Ungoliant that he would feed Ungoliant with whatever she desired. And so Melkor, also known as Morgoth, and Ungoliant went to Valinor and secretly went to the place of the trees. And they were partially able to go unnoticed because the rest of the Ainur, the Valar and the Maiar, were away at a high feast or festival celebrating, meaning that Melkor strategically planned this to occur at the right moment in time. Once at the two trees, Melkor took his black spear and started striking the trees. And as this was happening, Ungoliant was able to spread unlight through her webs and weavings. And this unlight was almost like a cloak of darkness that would devour light. It wasn't just the absence of light, but it was actually more of like a devouring darkness, this unlight. And it's my understanding that this was able to provide more cover of what they were doing to hide it from the Ainur who were away and not present during the time of the destruction of the trees. Once Melkor had struck those trees and wounded them, Ungoliant then went to the wounds of the trees and started literally sucking the light out of them. It was described that once the trees were struck by Melkor's spear, that their sap started to ooze like blood from them. And it was this that Ungoliant began to drink and to take away from the trees, taking away their light and life. Not only that, it stated that the poison of death that was inside of Ungoliant went into the tissues of the trees, resulting in the final and everlasting destruction of those two trees. However, the Valar, once they discovered the trees had been destroyed, they were able to take the last fruit of Laurelin and create the sun. And they were able to take the last flowers from Tel Perion and make the moon. That last fruit and that last flower were put in separate vessels, and they were guided by Maiar, who would literally guide these vessels in the sky. And then that last fruit would provide the light of the sun, actually being the sun, and that last flower would provide the light of the moon, actually representing the moon within the world that is Arda. And then going back to those trees, as many of you know, there were also elves living in the land of Valinor during the time of this incident. And one of them, named Fëanor, was actually able to create these jewels which housed the light of those two trees. And one of the last things that Melkor, also known as Morgoth, did is he stole those jewels also being known as the Silmarils. And he eventually made a crown and placed those Silmarils upon that crown. Once they had destroyed the two trees and Melkor had stolen those Silmarils, Melkor and Ungoliant fled within her unlight, that devouring darkness. Also, during that time that Melkor stole those Silmarils, he killed Finwë, the king of the Noldor. During that time frame, there were 3 different kindreds of elves living in Valinor, and the Noldor were one of those. And Finwë was the king of them. Finwë was actually Fëanor's father, Fëanor being the elf that had created those Silmarils. And then Melkor and Ungoliant fled under the cover of her unlight, that devouring darkness that wasn't just the absence of light, but that would devour light and cause harm to those around it. After they had escaped, Ungoliant was swollen and fat from the light of those trees. However, she just wanted more and more and more. And Melkor had stolen a lot from Valinor, and she requested that he feed her with both hands the treasures which he had stolen from Valinor. This consisted of many treasures of the Noldor elves. However, she eventually demanded that he feed her those Silmarils as well. When he refused to feed her these Silmarils, she grew angry with rage and then began to try to trap him with her webs of unlight. As he started to become strangled by the webs of unlight, he let out this dreadful cry that echoed throughout the lands. His scream traveled so far that Balrogs actually heard it in Angband. And there they fled to him and to his aid, and with their whips of fire defended their master Melkor and freed him from the grasp of Ungoliant, and Ungoliant fled from the Balrogs. And after she fled, she settled in an area of the Mountains of Terror and the Valley of Dreadful Death. And she would eventually have offspring. One of those offspring being Shelob, which of course we know during that time frame in Shelob's lair, with Frodo battling her with the light of Eärendil. I won't go into it now, but if you know the history of the light of Eärendil, that light has a connection to the light of the Silmarils. So it's just interesting that Frodo was able to combat Shelob, a descendant of Ungoliant, with light from those Silmarils that came from the 2 trees that Ungoliant had devoured. As for what happened to Ungoliant after that, we don't really know, but some things indicate that her hunger never ceased to the point where there was nothing else to devour but herself. And so there's much more to her story, but that at least is a brief synopsis of the life of Ungoliant. And in thinking about how we might be able to apply some things that we learned from Ungoliant into our own lives, one thing I think about is there's an importance to try to get away from and to avoid the Ungoliants of our lives. When you think about what Ungoliant did, she sucked the life out of things and took the light from things and devoured light. And not only that, she spun webs that created a darkness that would devour that unlight. And then that darkness would not only be an absence of light, but it would corrode and corrupt that which was around it. Sometimes in our own lives, there can be people that can literally suck the light out of us. And they also can bring darkness into our lives and corrupt and corrode what we are trying to accomplish or become. I am a huge believer in extending forgiveness to those who have wronged us. And that's because I truly believe that if we forgive others, it provides freedom to ourselves and we're able to let go. However, just because we forgive does not mean that we don't have boundaries for people that will literally suck the light out of you or what you're trying to accomplish or do in your life, or who will instill darkness into what you're trying to accomplish and corrode what you're trying to create. Sometimes I know in my own life, my own thoughts and my own mind can play the role of taking away the light and life and putting darkness into situations where it doesn't really necessarily need to be. In my own life, I've had my struggles with depression or anxiety or things like that. And in those moments, I've noticed that light is being taken out. At least that's what it seems like. And a darkness sets in and begins to corrode whatever it is that I'm trying to accomplish in my life, or even corrodes and darkens the things that I once enjoyed in my life, including important things like family connection, dreams or aspirations, hobbies, all those things. And so if we notice those things or notice that's going on, at least in my opinion, we need to take steps to try to reintroduce light once it's been sucked out of us. Of course, I'm not trying to take the place of a trained professional, and ultimately, if you're having a really hard time right now, I would encourage you to seek professional help. And if your feelings of darkness and despair are that extreme, don't wait. Go and seek that immediate help. However, in those times where your mind, for whatever reason, is doing things to take away the light and life within your life, for me personally, it's been good to try to do just little things that ultimately together make a more significant difference. Perhaps by themselves, they don't do a lot, but as a whole, if I implement them, I notice significant differences where I feel like I'm reintroducing light into my life. Some of those things include actually going out and getting sunlight. I know that maybe seems too simple, and by itself, it's not a huge thing. But coupled with other things, it actually helps me to feel better. Going out and getting out into the sun. Of course, not for too long periods of times where it's dangerous, but at least just getting some sunlight, that helps me. Another thing, when coupled with others, that tends to benefit me in introducing light back into my life is practicing gratitude. Trying to think about the things that I am thankful for, even when things are really difficult and tough. Thinking about things that I'm thankful for, even maybe some things that have happened in the past, maybe it's not occurring right now, but practicing gratitude and getting sunlight are two things that assist and help me to introduce light back into my life. Another thing is finding time to be still. Some people call it different things. You might call it meditation. If you're spiritual, it may be prayer. Whatever it is, finding time to be still and alone and taking a break from all the clutter, again, is something that benefits me. Maybe not by itself, but when I do all these other things, it can assist. And then lastly, just another thing is paying attention to your thoughts. If you're noticing habitual thoughts that take away light from you, that beat you up, that create doubt, that cause more of an internal struggle. Maybe it's just even constantly assuming what other people are thinking about you and caring too much about what people think. I've been there. I personally have done that. And when I do that, I know that light tends to be kind of sucked out of me. But if I pay attention to that and I try not to assume what other people are thinking about me and try to let go of that care so much about what other people think about me and pay more attention to my thoughts and realize or recognize when they're gravitating in a direction that takes away my light, if I catch that and replace it, it helps. Again, individually by itself, maybe not so much, but if you compound it with those other things, there tends to be a holistic approach that can be beneficial. At least that's been my experience. Then just one final thought. Melkor was insistent on trying to destroy the light. He destroyed the light of the two lamps, he destroyed the light of the two trees, and he stole the silmarils that contained the light of the two trees. It's been my experience that in your life, there will be times over and over again where either experiences, people, our own thoughts will try more than once to take away your light. If you can try to prepare yourself for those times and already have something in place for when that time comes, it can help you to more readily adapt and respond and get back to a place of reintroducing life into your light if you prepare for those moments. Because like Melkor, who came and on a multitude of occasions tried to destroy the light, unfortunately, it's been in my experience that things like that will happen more than once in our own personal lives. But if we prepare ourselves for moments like that, not to live in anxiety, but to have an actual game plan, okay, if these things happen, this is what I will do. It can prepare you to reintroduce yourself back into the light that has been sucked from you, just like Ungoliant would suck the light out of what was around her. And so those are just some thoughts that I have on that. And it's this part. It truly is an interesting topic, at least to me.